When we think of Africa, the image that often comes to mind is one of poor, starving children or a place rich in raw natural resources that can be exploited. But they provide a very incomplete picture of Africa.
This is the new face of the 21st century farmer. The clothes that you're wearing today, it's cotton that has been farmed by the farmer. The shoes that you're wearing, that's leather that comes from the cows that a farmer has.
It's been 200 years since the United States opened its first consulate in sub-Saharan Africa. Throughout the history of Africa's tribes and kingdoms, there is also a common and recurring theme of female warriors who exhibited a sense of collectiveness and intense militarism.
Africa's first spaceport opened in 1964 near Malindi, Kenya. In 1970, the first satellite specifically for X-ray astronomy, Uhuru, was launched from Kenya.
Why Codeways? How did it come about?
I've always had a passion for working with kids, and I've always had a passion for business.
Harvard's Global Health Catalyst Program, which was started by my guest, Dr. Wilfred Ngwa, to bridge the healthcare gap in low and middle income countries. Welcome to Africa2U. I'm Vivian Kopsinje-Birchall, your host, and my guest today is Dr. Azubike Onuora-Oguno. He is a law professor both in Nigeria and the Netherlands. And Professor Azubike, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be here.
Oh yeah, it's nice to have you here. Please tell us more about yourself and your journey in the international law profession.
Thank you, Vivian. I'm Nigerian. I'm a senior lecturer at the Department of Jurisprudence and International Law, Faculty of Law, University of Ilorin. Prior to that, I did my master's in human rights and democratization in Africa from the prestigious Center for Human Rights at University of Pretoria, from where I proceeded to intern with the International Criminal Court. Through my journeys, I have been a visiting researcher in the prestigious Osgood Hall Law School Fellowship in International Law. In the past, I have also given the Dean's launch guest lecture. I think I would say my professional journey started from the university days as an undergraduate at the Faculty of Law, University of Ilorin. I got to proceed to do my master's degree after getting my postgraduate diploma from the Nigerian Law School. I was in the LLM Human Rights and Democratization in Africa at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria. From there, I proceeded to intern with the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands. Since then, I joined the academics and I have been a visiting researcher to Osgood Hall Law School in York University, Canada. I have given the Dean's Lunchtime Lecture at the Thurgood Marshall Hall at Thurgood Marshall Law School in Houston, Texas. I have also spoken at the American Society of International Law. Presently, I am the Deputy Secretary General of Nigerian Society of International Law, Secretary General for International Public Law Society. I am also one of the research coordinators of the International Research Collaboration, specifically Group 3 of the Law and Society Association. I also work on issues of persons with disability in my faculty back in Nigeria in an Open Society Initiative for West Africa, a supported project on raising awareness about persons with disabilities.
Well, that's an impressive resume, Professor. This is Women's Month, and today you're here to talk about the girl child in Africa, specifically in Nigeria. But my first question to you is, how does education tie into human rights? And
Well,
in addition to that, what does the right to education mean?
Thank you, Vivian. You would agree with me because I major basically on the right to education, and it's something I have so much passion with. You could see my background. These are some of the works I've done around education and the right to education. So if you ask me what is the right to education, I will tell you that there is a huge ambit beyond the mere literal interpretation of the right to education in the UDHR or in the African Charter or even in the Nigerian Constitution. So basically, when we talk about the rights to education, we should also talk about the rights in education, the importance of the child to be able to access education, to be able to stay in education without his or her rights being violated. Quality education is also a major content of education. So talking about the right to education is a very wide one. Um, on the impact of education on human rights, I would say that the right to education is a classic right, which from my own treatise, I have found out that education is that basic right that guarantees the realization of every other right. So you cannot seek to realize, for example, the right to health without the right to education. And when we say education in this instance, we talk about functional education, literal education. So that child, that individual should be able at least to communicate, at least to be able to know even the medication he or she is taking and how to deal with several issues around him. So education is really the bedrock of every human rights.
And thank you for explaining that. And one of the things that has happened over the past few years, and most recently about a couple months ago, was the abduction of girls from schools in Nigeria. In what ways has the abduction affected girls' education in the region generally?
Thank you. This is a sad story that is coming from Nigeria. Because, like I said, when we unpack what it means to talk about the right to education, we will talk about the right to access, right? So here we are talking about not just physical access, you're also talking about every ambit of access. And when children don't feel safe in schools, then you are basically not granting them access. So the abduction of girls and boys from schools in Nigeria basically scared them away from wanting to access education. So that's a huge stumbling block. And I do hope perhaps somewhere in this interview, it might be necessary also to bring to the fore that there is a protective ambit to the realization of the right to education. So when I talk about a protective ambit, the government has a mandate both to promote, to fulfill, and also to protect. So building schools, it's a part of fulfilling. Doing campaigns for girls to go to school is a part of promoting. But what has happened to the right of protecting? The obligation to protect, it's a fundamental right that the state owes every individual in whatever circles they find themselves. But with these abductions we've seen in the recent past, and even from Chibok to Dabchi and all of that we have, you would agree with me that parents are scared. There is a phobia that is now preventing and inhibiting girls, most especially, to access schools.
And I mean, it's hard to even imagine what is going on in these communities where these abductions are happening. Um, as a parent, I can't even fathom how to balance education and then security. And I know security challenges in general, as they are social economic factor endangering gender disparities and access to education. So, what are some of the ways, some of the interventions you think parents in these regions can take in order to make sure that the girl child is not left behind?
Thank you, Vivian. So you're bringing up a question that in the human rights parlance, we find a bit nuanced. We must avoid the temptation of tipping the obligation of the state on the individual. For example, the Constitution of Nigeria says that the primary responsibility of the state is to ensure the security of lives and property. So if I'm beginning to respond on what the parents would have to do to ensure the safety, then my question will be, what then will be the obligation of the state? What would the state do in this instance? So the obligation, first of all, is that of the state. So if you're asking me what the state should do, I think it would be a more convenient basis for me to start on. What the parents need to do is to encourage the child to go to school. That is the obligation that is placed on the parent, while the state has the obligation to protect the child within the school.
And what are some of the measures that the state is putting in place to protect these girls?
Exactly. This becomes the worrisome area. What is the state doing? Are they doing enough? What should be enough in this instance? So then I would try to now trail back a bit. When we talk about education, you remember I said it has four major ambits. The first question is the question of access. There is also the aspect of acceptability. So we find out that what we have playing up initially in the northern part where the Boko Haram sect was the sect that was attacking schools is because they are said to reject Western education. So what has government done to ensure that the so-called Western education, because I mean some scholars have questioned that nomenclature of Western education. Education really is education. So the question is, what is the state doing to ensure that the education that is made available to pupils in various regions are acceptable to them? Does education, scholars like Ngugi Wationgu and Jomo Kenyatta, they have in various treaties said that anything that deprives the dignity of an individual is not worthy to be called an education. So if government has a responsibility, an oversight function, whether in the private or in the public education system, to ensure that the content of education, I specify here content of education, it's one that is acceptable and adaptable to a people, then that is a sufficient place to start from. Then even the abductors would see the need for an education. So there is a gap of neglect that has left to be to linger on for quite a while, and that informs why we have these violations going around. And sadly, the girl child is the more vulnerable victim in this situation.
And one of the things that sometimes bothers me when it comes to education, it's not directly related to the abductions, but just education in general in Africa. We are lost skills building education. And the schools or education is focusing on classrooms, theories. And I don't know whether it is whose obligation it is to make sure that our children, especially the girl child, are equipped with skills beyond just sitting in classrooms that are going to help them in the everyday life. I don't know whether you have anything to say to that.
You're very right. And you again remember at the inception of this interview, I said that when we talk about education, we talk about a wide spectrum. Education could be informal, it could be formal, it could be semi-formal. And I talked about acceptability and adaptability. What type of education? The government has an oversight function. It is the responsibility of government. I have argued in one of my works, The Right to Development and Education in Africa, that there is the need for governments to ensure curriculum development in line with the best practices. So, for example, you're taking mere formal classroom education to a nomadic zone. How does it work?
Mhm.
You're taking mere classroom education to an indigenous population like the Batwa in Uganda. How does it work? There is the need to ensure that education is specifically tailored to the needs of the people. And this includes skill acquisition for functional life education.
But then, one of the challenges now, I'm being a devil's advocate to that approach, is if we're going to compete internationally, we're in a global economy. We find that some of the education that we receive in Africa is almost not recognized by some places. I don't know whether you have any experience with that, and whether you can say anything to that.
Vivian, what you raise, I would not say it is not happening, but I guess it's a different discourse for another day. Right.
That's true.
But, however, let me place an anecdote. When you are functionally educated, you have a skill you can export anywhere in the world. Skills are not limited. I mean, we are in an era of globalization. It becomes an issue of economies of trade. When I have my skills, which I have gained through education, and you bring what you have, then it's going to be a measure, and then we can move forward. So if I take you to Article 26 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights that talks about the right to education, if you go down to subsection 2, it talks about education empowering an individual to positively, with emphasis, positively impact on his society and country and the world in general. So there is that ambit of positive impartation, which I can tell you, I mean, we've had people in Africa develop things. We've had people in Africa do some ingenious inventions. However, government's failure to support this indigenous knowledge, indigenous technology, makes it look as if it does not exist. But I can tell you that from the streets of Nigeria to the streets of Cairo to Cape, you have African children who are skilled in different indigenous abilities to do much more than our minds can think of.
Absolutely. I am a huge advocate for indigenous knowledge and indigenous education. And I truly believe that it's the one untapped area that could uplift our youth in Africa. I mean, we have a huge youth population. But anyway, this just, I'm going to move away from that a little bit and get back into the girl child. Can you describe some of the history of female education in Nigeria?
Well, talking about the history of female education, maybe the start point would be that it never existed, because the girl child was only meant to be seen and not to be heard.
I
So,
would disagree a bit because I think the education, some of it was informal, like you said before, some of it was formal.
yes, even at that, the question I would ask is, what was the target of that informal education? The target of that informal education was already gendered. It was already tailored at making the girl child a domestic help, a burden bearer. So remember again, I talked about UDHR and Article 26 and the positive content of education. So where it doesn't specifically empower that individual for a living, it becomes an issue. So here we had a structure that sought to prepare the girl child for a role that the society has constructed. What is that role? Teach the girl child how to breastfeed, teach the girl child how to wake up early and prepare the house and make meals for the males. So that was it until things started changing and girls started going to school. Now I also recognize the dichotomy of what happened between the south and the north of Nigeria. Because in the south, access to education, both for the boy and the girl child, was more than you would have in the north. I mean, some people have argued that religion was one of the reasons, and the rejection of what is called Western education vis-a-vis acceptance of Islamic education, it's another. So these were factors that inhibited access of the girl child to school. Again, culturally, there was this thinking that spending money to train a child was wasting money because the child was going to get married and going to leave the family. So the traditional Nigerian society paid less credence to the training of the girl child, except in very, very few circumstances. But I think over time, this narrative have continued to change. It's changing by advocacies, and that is why I salute the wonderful work you do, because this has a long way to impact the ideas and thoughts of very numerous people that do think that assessing education for the girl child is not it. I think the story is different today.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, what are some of the problems that, in addition to abduction, of the girl child education in Nigeria, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic?
That's huge. COVID has brought us to a new normal. So if you look at one of the pictures that it's there on the background, talking about online education, and the girl child is asking, yes, we support it, but what about us? Now, because the girl child is steeped in some form of extreme poverty, there is that challenge. In terms of COVID, how is that child in that rural village coping with accessing online education is difficult. Then statistics show that in the COVID era, that the number of sexual violence related cases shot up in virtually every community, not just in Africa, but I believe also across the globe, because the girl child was now locked up in a closed space with domestic violators. So we've had issues of fathers, brothers, close family relatives are violently abusing girls sexually and in other terms. So these two aspects, the poverty level and the level of violence against the girl child, are two core negative aspects that that the COVID-19 era brought upon us.
And are there other, you just talked about, domestic abuse in the households during the pandemic. And I'm curious, are there any other health related challenges to the education of the girl child in this in this past few years?
Yes, there is. And the one that is often neglected is the sanitary health of the child, of the girl child. Because of poverty, quite a number of girls do not have access to sanitary pads. They do not have access to knowledge about taking care of monthly menstrual cycles. So within those scopes, within those settings, this has become a grave and a very difficult situation for the girl child to strive and live in.
That is actually, that is another topic that I'm very passionate about: the access to female hygiene for the girl child, because from first-hand experience of growing up in a not so wealthy community. So I hope that governments can do something about it.
That,
And
that is a huge hope, because the challenge is presently now, for example, in Nigeria, with the abductions, with the seeking of ransoms from the bandits, there is the question of what should be the focus of the government. Is it security or the provision of economic and other social responsibilities? And for me, I would say you must balance the two. There is need to balance the two.
I just, sometimes I'm at a loss of words, because I mean, there is balancing the two, but then the governments come up and say they don't have enough resources, and they're like, okay, maybe they need to reprioritize the allocation of resources. But it is an interesting conversation.
Yes, it is, and that jurisprudence. It's one that is well settled within the African human rights architecture. There is what we call the progressive realization. The progressive realization theory talks about giving government the latitude to progressively realize some of these economic challenges that demands budgetary interventions and all of that. But in talking about progressive realization, it is important that we note that there are three major ambits. In the first, it's what is the plan? There has to be a plan. The second, is the plan realistic? And the third is, can we measure the realization of the plan? So you have to reprioritize, you have to do whatever you have to do, but we need a plan. So if our plan, for example, in education, is that we are going to give good schools, quality schools of 10 every 5 years, all right, then is it realizable? And then after every 5 years, can we count and see the number of schools you have built? So when we talk about economic rights in these instances, governments can no longer hide under the shadow of progressive realization to abdicate the responsibilities they owe citizens. We need budgetary plans that we can monitor and we can actually say they are realizable and we can follow through on.
Which takes me right into my next question, which is about innovative ways um, that could be adopted by any African government, the Nigerian government, and other regions with conflicts to adequately protect the girl child and her access to education and to protect all children for that matter.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, one concept that I am getting involved and interested in very recently uh, is the work on solidarity rights, enjoyment of international solidarity. There is need for states, developing and developed states, to get to the point of appreciating the concept of solidarity rights. For example, in the COVID vaccine, the United Nations independent expert on enjoyment of solidarity rights, Professor Biokafo, has said that no one is safe until everyone is safe.
Sure.
So whether it's on the COVID vaccine or in access and protection of the child in within the education space, the world is not safe until everyone is safe. So there is need for government. For example, I was listening over the news some days back with the United States government offering to provide some support to the Nigerian governments in terms of tackling the kidnapping and abduction in schools. So basically, intelligence gathering, um, arms supply, equipping of the military, funding, are all cooperative and solidarity moves that we should also now be exploring, because the fight against the bandits and insurgents and non-state actors that are violent, like the Boko Haram, the Lord Resistance Army, wherever they find themselves, I think we need to have a blend of both the kinetic and non-kinetic means.
It's interesting. You just mentioned the LRA, which again reminds me we have a lot in common, Nigeria and Uganda in terms of those conflicts and abductions and how the impact of children in that region. So, what are some of the lessons we can learn from these conflicts? Because we have seen the impact in northern Uganda. We're seeing the impact in Nigeria. And why is it that these abductions are not stopping? And what can we learn from it?
Government's irresponsibility. The government needs to do more, because people go into the trenches when they need to revolt. There is what is called the struggle theory. There is what is called the resistance, which says that the realization of rights is like two sides of the coin. On the one part, people cede their sovereignty to the states with hope that the state will provide education, provide health, provide sufficient amenities for them. But when this does not happen, and sadly, corruption takes the toll. The ECOWAS court has issued a judgment against Nigeria on the impact of corruption on education in the Serap versus Federal Government of Nigeria. The expert committee on the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child has issued a decision against the government of Uganda in Hansongule versus Uganda on the obligation of the states to protect the child and what is happening in. So basically, this goes down to good governance. There is need for us to go back to the basics of good governance. and ensure that the indices of good governance are not far from our society.
Why is it difficult for some people to recognize these indices for good governance and to implement them?
Well, do I say it's difficult? Because beautifully in Africa, Africa has taken some interesting steps. I have done a book on African Union Agenda 2063, which is a beautiful policy document by the African Union, focusing on aspiration 3 of that agenda, which speaks to the role of education and gender empowerment in building the Africa we want. There are strategic policies that we should follow. These things are there, but I wouldn't know why corruption continues to rear its ugly head and deprive people of the basic amenities they should get. Because for me, these are part of the challenges, because people get dissatisfied and then they need to revolt. They need to demand their rights. It's another thing when we now argue that the various ideologies that they are hinging these demands on are negative. Right, I agree. Some of these approaches are negative, but again, that comes to the human factor. But if we decide that we need to adhere to the indices of good governance, then I think we should be able to gradually, maybe not speedily, evolve from some of these sorry situations we have.
We could go on and on about governance in Africa, but then just for the sake of this particular interview, I'll just ask you, what is the one word you have for our viewers about the girl-child education, the status of the girl-child education in Africa, specifically in Nigeria?
The one word I have would be Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. The girl child can be whatever. The world has a large space that every child that is empowered can assume whatever status. I wouldn't also want to talk about the likes of Chimamanda Adichie, the likes of you, Vivian. You're doing excellently. So the one word I have, the opportunities are limitless. The girl child can be whatever the girl child is empowered to be.
Thank you, Professor Azubike. It's been an honor hosting you. It's been an honor getting to see you again after so many years.
Thank you.
And I hope to host you again to talk about governance in Africa. And
it will be my pleasure.
And to our viewers, if you want to learn more about stories at Africa2U, just go to africa2u.org or email me at africa2u.vivian@gmail.com. Thank you for watching Africa2U. Till next time.
Bye-bye.